Today, we're going to talk about the #1 selling truck in America right now. It should surprise nobody that the truck we're going to talk about is Freightliner. But is Freightliner selling a quality product, or are they mass producing trucks and ignoring the problems that they have? Well, we'll see what it comes up with, but we're going to hear how the company got started way back in 1929. But before we get started talking about Freightliner, you guys know me and know that I'm usually wearing, sometimes I wear a Landstar hat if I don't have, any other hat, but I usually try to wear hats of other YouTubers that I really like. Gentry and Sons I wear a lot. Makes sense. Sammy at Mark Makes Sense is a great guy. Trucker G, I wear his hat a lot. And yeah, so I try to change up the hats a bit and make everything, try to support other channels. And well, I decided to do that today too, but my buddy didn't have a hat. He doesn't have a hat yet. So when you can't get one, you make your own. I decided to custom make my own. And just like him, I stored it on the ceiling. So let's do this. All right. I officially have the first Patriot specialized in heavy haul hat ever made. When you can't get one, you make your own. And like I said, just like him, I stored it on the ceiling.
Money, man. Okay. Yeah, well, hopefully that's how this goes this week. Money. We are currently in Pennsylvania, rolled out yesterday.
I'm even going to use his catchphrase. All right.
All right. We are all loaded up.
I feel like he got that from somewhere else. But I don't know when he's going to get back to me about this. He's actually on vacation with his beautiful wife in England right now. Not sure why they went there. I don't even know if they speak the language. What language do they speak in England? Really, guys, the reason I'm talking about hats, and I know Brett's going to think that was hilarious when he sees it, but, or at least I hope. If not, he might come track me down. But is because I do have a new hat. And there it is. And I have quite a few of them. And I'm going to tell you at the end here how you can get your own, because you can get your own if you'd like. So, Freightliner started in 1929, sort of. The name didn't come until a short time later, but it started because Consolidated Freightways founder Leland James started buying Fragile, that's right, I couldn't remember, but it did come up in my Peterbilt story. Fragile trucks as a base, and then he would place the cab above the front axle, therefore making a much shorter truck. That would allow for them to pull much longer trailers and stay in compliance with very strict length laws. The company started in 1929 as Freightways Manufacturing, and sometime in the 1930s they started calling them Freightliners, although the company name remained the same. These trucks were not only shorter, but also much lighter because of the use of aluminum cabs. So this was actually brought to my attention, and the reason I sparked to do this story, my friend Dave from the Trucker Dave and Red channel, I feel like I'm just talking about other channels today. Trucker Dave and Red channel, he was talking to me, and he said he really liked my Peterbilt story, and he brought the Fragile thing to my attention. So the Peterbilt story is up here, and it will tell you how that company is, how Peterbilt is connected to Fragile. So in 1942, Leland James officially named the company Freightliner Corporation. And that was when the actual name was established, although, like I said, somewhere in the 30s is when they started calling them that. During World War II, just like almost every other vehicle manufacturer, Freightliner started producing for the war efforts. They started producing trucks again in 1947. In 1949, they sold their first truck to Heister Forklifts. This truck is preserved at the Smithsonian. In 1951, Freightliner entered into an agreement with one of the largest truck manufacturers, White Motor Company. So White would sell the cabovers under the White Freightliner name. So essentially, Freightliner well, Leland James not only invented the Freightliner, he also invented cab over trucks, pretty much. Here's an interesting fact that I found out. During the time that they were under the white Freightliner label, all the trucks that were sold to Consolidated Freightways were Freightliners. They did not have the white logo on them. I thought that was pretty interesting. So during them years, you actually could buy a Freightliner. It would just, you know, be a cornflake truck. So in 1953, they retired the original shovel nose. I guess that's what they called the original ones. They introduced the new WFT design. I could not find out what WFT stands for, but I gotta assume that it stands for White Freightliner Truck. But this had an option for an overhead mounted sleeper. That sounds absolutely horrible. It also had a Mountaineer 4x4 system option. Still can't get over that overhead sleeper. Yeah, I'll just take what I got. It was a really big oversized load, a really long oversized load backing in across from me. Yeah, impressive. Anyway, maybe I'll show you guys here in a second. I will show you. How about that? There it is. I'm not sure how long that thing is, but yeah, I mean, watching him back it up is pretty incredible. I mean, man, that thing's got to be 100 feet long. Wow. Pretty incredible. Someday, maybe. So in 1958, they updated the cab to a tilt-forward design. And apparently they were the first to do this. Now, when I did the Peterbilt story, I talked about Peterbilt going to it. I said, you know, how did you get to it? Did you get to it from the back? And a few people did reach out to me and tell me that they used to remove the doghouse and I guess work on the truck from the inside. I mean, I don't know. I used to have a van that I worked on from the inside, and I didn't really love that so much. Yeah, I guess, yeah, I've never had to deal with that. But in 1961, they opened their first Canadian plant in Barnaby, British Columbia. And the reason they did that is because at the time, Canada had huge import tariffs. So all they had to do was open up a plant across the border because, you know, they were a Portland company. So go right across the border and they weren't paying the import tariffs. Apparently later that tariff was lifted. But they also opened plants in Indianapolis, Chino, California, and a second Portland plant strictly for parts production. That was in 1969 that they opened that one. So in the 1970s, White Motor Company was having some problems due to some bad investing decisions. It was 1974 when Freightliner decided to end their distribution contract with White Motor Company. And this made them a standalone company, just Freightliner at that point. Yeah, but when they did this, they also introduced their first conventional, and they hit it out of the ballpark the first time. The FLC 120, it's just an incredible truck. I love it. In 1979, they opened a plant in Mount Holly, North Carolina, and a parts plant in Gastonia, North Carolina. So in 1982, the Surface Transportation Assistance Act was put in place, and the length restrictions were lifted. So I got a little bit ahead of myself there, because in 1981, Consolidated Freightways realized that they were in trouble because of deregulation, and they sold Freightliner to Daimler-Benz, basically so that they could focus on their #1 business. I thought that was interesting. I mean, I was alive when Consolidated Freightways owned Freightliner. I did not know that. I had heard over time that they started Freightliner, but I did not know that, you know, they owned them up till the 80s. That is crazy. But anyway, go back to before the length restrictions lifted. So now overall truck length was not restricted. It was actually just the trailers were restricted. So I got my notes as always here. I'm sure you guys can see them. Keep looking down to see them. So at the same time that Daimler-Benz bought them, the Chino, California and Indianapolis plants were closed permanently. So in 1987, Freightliner produced their first FLD 112 and 120s. This is an iconic truck to me. I love it. I think it's one of the best trucks ever built. It was a workhorse truck. It had a great interior. You know, if you ordered it, optioned well. But it had a great cockpit style interior. It was a little bit more aerodynamic. It had the skirts down the side, so it was, you know, a step into the future, but it still had a long enough hood that it was easy to work on, you know, without the hood, without half the engine being stuffed up into the cab. Definitely one of my favorite trucks of all time. I'll get talking to here in just a couple minutes here about why Freightliner, you know, FLDs are so important to me. So in 1990, they expanded the FLD line to include the long hood FLD Classic 120 and 132 Classic XL. So Freightliner's FLDs, Classics, they will always have a special place with me. I mean, my first truck, actually the first truck I ever drove legally, I mean, not in a parking lot or something, I was trained, a friend of mine trained me to drive in a 1999 Freightliner Classic. And my first truck that I drove on my own after I was done training was one just like his, a 1990 Freightliner FLD Classic. And a few years later, when I bought my first truck, it was a 1996 Freightliner Condo Classic. And I owned that truck for a long time, did a lot of work to it. Really loved that truck. So, you know, I have this Peterbilt now, but I really love all trucks. And like I said, Freightliner has a special place with me. But in the mid 1990s, they closed their Burnaby, British Columbia plant and opened a plant in St. Thomas, Ontario. So they also started producing at a Mexican plant about 30 miles outside of Mexico City. It did say the town, and you do not want me trying to pronounce that. But yeah, it said it's about 30 miles out of Mexico City, and that plant was already owned by Daimler-Benz. So in 1996, Freightliner introduced their first total redesign in over 20 years, the Freightliner Century Class. That same year, they also bought American LaFrance, the fire apparatus company. In 1997, they purchased the truck division of Ford Motor Company and rebranded it Sterling. This name was brought back apparently years ago. There was a brand called Sterling that was owned by White Motor Company, but they rebranded it Sterling. And I actually drove a Sterling, one of my first jobs. I only drove for about a month. It was a day cab, and the only reason I did that is because I came to work for the company, but they didn't have a road truck for me yet. So I drove this for a while. And it was funny because it was called a Sterling, but it looked exactly like the Fords did, you know, in the year or two before that. And it, I remember the steering wheel had the, like basically the same thing my mom's Ford Taurus did, you know, had the buttons, the on-off buttons, or like the F-150s where it had the same cruise control buttons, things like that. So I always thought that was funny. It was called Sterling, but it was still pretty much a Ford. I guess Ford was still making a lot of the parts for them. In 1998, they purchased Thomas-built buses. And of course, on this channel, I really only talk about Class 8 trucks, so I didn't actually get into their business class or, you know, the Mercedes, you know, business class box trucks and stuff. I pretty much, you know, to keep the videos to a decent length, just talk about Class 8 trucks. But in 1999, they produced their 1 millionth truck. And in the same year, they introduced the Columbia. So the Columbia was an expansion on the Century. It was basically a Century, but they said they made it more of a company truck. I still don't know why they ever did this. I don't really like the Columbia as much as I like the Century, but they're pretty much the same truck. I just always like the styling of the Century a little bit more. Yeah, just I get, but you know, I've talked to people that like the styling of the Columbia better than the Century. So I was never really sure why they ran for so many years. Pretty much the exact same truck, with just really just different headlights. I mean, different hood, but for the most part, different headlights. So in the early 2000s, Freightliner purchased Western Star, a Canadian company, and they moved it from British Columbia to Portland. I never knew that before. I did not know that Western Star was a Canadian company that moved to Portland. However, I can promise you that in the future there will be a history on Western Star. You know, another truck I've loved throughout the years. I don't know why I say that. I've pretty much loved all trucks throughout the years. But now in 2002, Freightliner bought Detroit. Most Freightliners had Detroits, but you didn't have to get a Detroit in it. I actually think this was the beginning of the downfall for a lot of what was great about trucking back then. And basically it was that you could pretty much buy any truck with any engine back then. Mack and Volvo, you know, excluded from that. There may have been some that had their own engines, but you still could buy a Mack or a Volvo with any of the other engines. In fact, you know, I was talking about that Sterling that I drove. That actually had a 3406 cat in it. The guy that I worked for at the time was a big cat guy, and it went from, when I went from that, I went into a 1995 Volvo that would have had a 5EK 3406 cat in it. And then after that, I went in, my dad worked for the same company, and when he got a new truck, I got his old truck, which was a 1999 Volvo with that would have been a 2WS 3406 cat. And he went into it, they bought Peterbilt 378s for some reason, and that would have been a 6NZ cat. So, I mean, just imagine, you know, nowadays, if you, whatever job you had, you wanted that engine, or you wanted the Detroits. A lot of Volvos had Detroits, and a lot of Internationals had Detroits. But you wanted a Detroit, or you wanted a Cat, or you wanted a Cummins, you wanted the old M14. But you still want the maneuverability. Let's say you're a New York City driver, or, you know, something like that. You want the maneuverability of that Volvo. It's just, yeah, I think that was the beginning of one of the downfalls in trucking. So also in 2002, Freightliner introduced the Cornado. It was basically the same as the Century and Columbia inside, but had a longer hood. It still had the round headlights like the Century, but it mimicked the Classic XL with the longer hood. This is a truck that I liked almost from the beginning. You know, way back Volvo put long hoods on their trucks, and I didn't really get it. But this was more aerodynamic, but still, you know, owner-operator friendly, had a longer hood, easier to work on. It was, yeah, it was a truck that I liked. So in 2005, they sold American LaFrance to a private equity firm. In 2006, they ended production of the Argosy. I didn't talk about the Argosy much. I didn't see in the timeline when the Argosy started. Most of you know it, though. It was the last Freightliner cab over, and you open the door, the steps would swing out. I know the truck had some pretty serious electrical problems, but overall they were, you know, decent little cab overs for being the last cab overs. They were the last company to end selling cab overs in the United States. And what's funny is, to this date, Freightliner still makes the Argosy in North America, between Mexico, Canada, and I believe they said North Carolina, for export only. When do you ever hear that something's made in America for export? You just don't really hear that much. In 2008, Freightliner consolidated the Century and Columbia, and they did that by forming the Cascadia. In 2010, the FLD Classic was discontinued. And they replaced it with the 2011 Freightliner Cornado SD, which was a lot different than the original Cornado. Totally different truck. So for the next couple of years, everything I can find is just Freightliner getting involved with electric trucks, hybrids, autonomous trucks, all that. There's a whole bunch of information out about them. I'm not really putting that in the video because I don't understand it all, and you know, maybe someday, but I don't understand it all right now. And maybe they should have focused more of their attention on their current computer systems, because in 2020, Freightliner was fined $30 million by the National Highway Truck Safety Administration because they failed to, I think it's the Truck Safety Administration, whatever it is. I was going to look that up and I didn't, I'm sorry. But NHTSA. Because they failed to recall dozens of safety defects that they knew about. They had already been ordered to issue 24 recalls by the NHTSA that they were choosing to ignore. And they report that there have already been over 100 recalls on what they call their flagship. I have a lot of trouble calling this the flagship. I don't hate the truck, it's just weird to call the Cascadia the flagship of the company. Their model. Now, after this happened, Freightliner CEO Roger Nielsen was replaced by Daimler-Benz CFO John O'Leary. So I guess they decided to make some drastic changes there real fast. So it leads you to wonder, are they mass producing junk? I've actually never driven a Cascadia. I have driven Century, I've driven Columbia back in the day, but you know, most of the time the Cascadias have been around, I've been with Landstar here, and I pretty much had 3 trucks during that time, so none of them were a Cascadia. So yeah, let me know, guys. You know, if you love your Cascadia, I know people that absolutely love them Cascadias. If you love yours, you know, tell me about it. If you had a horrible experience with them, and you know, things like that, let me know. But like I say, Freightliner, you know, holds a place near and dear to me, always will. You know, is my first love, I guess. my first love in trucking, the Freightliner. But yeah, anyway, guys, hey, I appreciate this as always. I love the comments. You know, comment below. I read all the comments. You also can reach me by emailing me at finchresources@gmail.com. Finch like the bird, that's my last name. And I can also be found on Facebook or Instagram under the Trucking Resources name. I recommend Facebook over, and I do a lot more with Facebook. But I told you guys how you can get some swag if you want. By the way, there's also some other products I sell. I'm going to be getting some more things in as time goes on. But there are some other products that I've been selling for a long time that I haven't talked about. Just some truck products, some stuff that I think will help truck drivers, owner-operators, company drivers alike. So, you know, go over there and check out the website. Like I say, it's finchresources.com. And I will put a link down in the description. But thanks, as always, guys. Like and subscribe if you like this video, and I'll catch you on the next one.